Do not adjust your digital device. What you are about to see and hear may shock and appall you. Join our hosts as they encounter countless thrills, spills, chills, and hilarity as they explore the very weirdest in pop culture. The following media is so strange, so beyond the scope of what is normal, it will make you ask the question, why does this exist? Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Why Does This Exist? I'm Chris.
And I'm Rob.
And today we will be talking with you lovely people over in digital media device land about WrestleMania! We are of course talking about WrestleMania. It's the biggest wrestling spectacle of the year. It's something that's been going on, 37 years now. Mm-hmm. This is the big one. As of this recording, it is. We are a couple of days out from WrestleMania 37, so we will not be doing our predictions. Also, I have not really been watching wrestling as often as I used to.
Yeah, I have not been following WWE, so I'm not even sure like what the main event is actually at this WrestleMania.
Well, for night one or night two, because now they officially made it 2 nights for the second year in a row, which is something that I said that they should be doing for years. It got to a point where they were doing it like 8 hours if you include the pre-show, and I just started calling it day.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, I just started calling it Day Shift-a-mania because it was just absurd to like have the bandwidth to do 8 hours of pro wrestling in a day.
Yeah.
And on top,
being someone that you bought tickets to WrestleMania and you have to go there and sit.
Oh, I was gonna say that. I was gonna say that's the worst part. I would especially if you have the nosebleed seats. Then what is the point?
Right.
Like you're paying probably like $300 for like the nosebleed seats, and you're sitting up in those uncomfortable chairs for 8 hours. The next day, you're not gonna have an ass. It's gonna be numb.
It's more than 8 hours. Let's face it. Because
you got to get there too, and you got to go home.
You got to get there. You sit there. You're there before the show starts,
mm-hmm.
and then you're there probably for a little bit after the show ends because there's always stuff that happens off camera after the end of the show.
Right.
So you're really there probably closer to 10 hours. 10 to 12 hours.
Yeah, not to mention how long it takes to get out of the place.
Oh my god, especially WrestleMania.
Jeez.
I think the biggest pay-per-view I went to was SummerSlam at the stadium. It was at the arena down in East Rutherford, and that was like, I think the show ended at 11, but we didn't actually get out of the sports complex until probably like midnight because of how bad the traffic was.
Oh, and, yeah.
It's like it takes. I had to drop my friend off back at home, and his house was literally like 10 minutes away, and it took us an hour to get there.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Just because it was like an hour getting out of the parking lot. Yeah, and that was only SummerSlam, which it's the biggest show of the summer, but that's still that's WrestleMania is even bigger than that. So.
Yep. Well, even for Raws, it's still you're still getting home pretty late. I haven't gone to any major pay-per-views, but I've gone to a bunch of Extreme Rules, and I've gone to 3 out of the 4 NXT takeovers that were in New York. I didn't go to the last one. Mm-hmm. And those are some pretty big shows. And I went to a TLC, and I went to a bunch of Raws and SmackDowns in between. I can't recall everything else, but even even a sold out live event where there's no people, it still takes you a good 20 to 30 minutes just to leave the building.
Yeah.
But if you're going to a show in Madison Square Garden, it still takes you like a good 30 to 45 minutes to even try to get out. Mm-hmm. So it's like I can't imagine how crazy it is with WrestleMania.
Yeah, and after sitting there for 10 hours, you're freaking tired, you're achy, you just want to go home. Like, so it makes a lot more sense to have it split up onto 2 different days, Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah. So anyway, the headliner for night 1, I think, is Drew McIntyre and Bobby Lashley for the Universal Championship. I forget which one. I forget if the Raw one is the Universal Championship or the SmackDown one is, because the other one is WWE. I think the Raw one is Universal Championship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it's Bobby Lashley versus Drew McIntyre, and the other is Roman Reigns, Daniel Bryan, and Edge for the WWE title. And I think that's headlining the whole thing on Sunday.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, well, it was just going to be Roman Reigns and Edge, which I would have been fine with just a spear versus spear match, and then, and then they worked Daniel Bryan into the storyline where now he's getting thrown in there because there was like some shenanigans at the last pay-per-view where Edge got involved in the match versus when he was like the special enforcer of like Daniel Bryan versus Roman Reigns, and it was a good match. And then like just stuff happened and Edge got involved, and then Roman Reigns won and Daniel Bryan's mad, and he was like, this would have never happened if you didn't get involved, and then they did this whole thing, so now it's a triple threat match, which I don't mind either, but also I'm thinking, to make a prediction that may or may not happen, I don't know. It'll be done by the time this episode is over. Like, by the time this episode is, like, up.
Yeah.
So, at this point in time, I imagine that Daniel Bryan is simply there to to take the pin from whoever it is that's going to win.
Yeah, I would imagine. I'm going to say they're probably going to keep the belt on Roman Reigns.
Yeah, I would think so.
Especially because Edge is kind of just a part-timer right now. I think he has to make 6 appearances a year or something. They're not going to make him. Although, I mean, they've made friggin'
Goldberg. Yeah. Well, I think Edge, like, he came back last year with the intention of just doing his final run, like his swan song, that he could go out on his own terms. Mm-hmm. And he got injured again. He like tore his tricep or something like that.
Yeah.
So he had to take the year off on the shelf, and now he's back again, I guess, to finish that swan song off, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking that he's gonna win, so that they could give him that, like, so that he could like have a real, feud and send off and whatever whatever it is. I don't think that Daniel Bryan. I think he's gonna. I guess they'll both spear Daniel Bryan, and the poor guy is gonna like take the pin after a good showing.
Yeah.
But I also wouldn't be surprised if Roman Reigns ended up winning too, because he's doing the best work of his career, and he kind of needs to still have the belt on him.
Yeah.
I think it makes more sense to do that, but we'll see what they do.
Let's face it, WWE has been known to make some decisions that don't make sense.
Well, just wrestling in general does not make any sense. For example, at a most basic level, a man getting hit with a steel chair does not go to jail that night. Instead, he goes home, and everyone in front of everybody on national television, he assaults somebody else with foreign objects or international objects if your network is not allowing you to make those terms. And he simply does not go to jail after physically assaulting someone with a steel chair. And instead he just goes home, or he goes to the airport to go to the next show. No charges are filed. None of this stuff happens. But on the flip side, the other guy doesn't go to the hospital at all. The other guy shows up again the following night, and sometimes it's as if nothing ever happened. So wrestling does not make any sense. Like if somebody hit me with a chair and I had the tenacity to show up the following day, the first thing I would do is not cut a promo on the guy. I would be looking for the person so that I could hit them with a chair too. Or if I wasn't planning on doing worse. That's if I was even allowed back into the building. But in real life situations, neither of those things would happen. I'd be in the hospital. The other person would probably be in jail. And I don't know. We'd have to settle it the legal way, and I'd probably be getting a piece of this guy. And of course the lawyer's getting their cut too, because of course they do. Yeah. Except Larry and Steve, while they get their cut, they're they're distinguished gentlemen. Oh god. Anyway, before we can start talking about WrestleMania, we would like to thank everybody who has liked, shared, and subscribed to our YouTube channel. That's Why Does This Exist? You can find us there, and you can check out all of our cool stuff, including all of our clips from last week, as it is now up, of the Tiger King stuff, with me, you, and special guest Tom. That's his name from now on. His name will his full show name will be Special Guest Tom. And the following episode that's going to be going up in a couple of days is the M. Dickey video games episode. So if you want to know about that stuff, it'll be there. This is the 10th episode, by the way. No, this is the 11th episode.
April's turning out to be a month of wrestling too. You know, you have the M. Dickey games. We're doing WrestleMania now. It's I guess it's appropriate since it's WrestleMania season.
Yeah, you can't just do it You can't just do one episode. You have to do several.
Yeah.
But you guys can also get all of our stuff. Thank you for listening and watching our videos. But you can also find us on podbean.com. So that is Podbean. That is Why Does This Exist podcast.podbean.com. You can also You can also get some bonus material, such as watch-alongs, listen-alongs, as well as some excess banter that we just had that we just didn't use. Mm-hmm. And you can do that by giving us a couple of bucks and heading over to patreon.com/whydoesthisexist. That's patreon.com/whydoesthisexist. And if you want to help donate to the channel, do it there. And thank you very much. And you can also find our podcast on a litany of places, whether it's on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, Pandora, TuneIn, Alexa, iHeartRadio, Player FM, Listen Notes, Stitcher, and wherever you get the rest of your podcasts. That's where you can find us. Now, as I said before, I started working on the site today. It is not yet up, but we will be having a website soon where you will be able to find our archive stuff a little bit easier, and you'll also be able to eventually read a couple of articles that we'll put up just about other weird things in pop culture, just as like one-off articles that we may not necessarily cover on the episodes. And if the support is there and we figure out how to do this with the lovely folks at Squarespace, then maybe we'll have a shop in town too, so that you guys can pick up some cool t-shirts. Who doesn't want a Ragtag Group of Rogues shirt?
Yeah.
And if there's anything extra that you guys have found in pop culture, for better or worse, and you want to drop us a line, you may do so by emailing us at whydoesthisexistshow@gmail.com. That's whydoesthisexistshow@gmail.com. And we would greatly appreciate what you'd have to say and we could talk about it on the show. Also, if you also want to give us a tip, you can do so by letting us know in the comments section, and we'll talk about whatever you have to do. Speaking of people that we need to talk about. From our Tiger King episode last week, there was our YouTube clip where we broke down Jeff Lowe. Now, we spoke about Jeff Lowe in the podcast. If you don't know who he is, he's one of the people on Tiger King. He is probably the biggest douchebag of all of them on the show. Let's be serious for a minute. What the guy, like, I'm not going to go back into examining him because we already did that. You can find that on YouTube. The name of the clip is Examining Tiger King's Jeff Lowe. Him and his crazy wife, who is, I don't know what he did to get her. She's too hot for him. She's tricked into whatever it is that they're in. He does this thing where he goes into like Vegas casinos. The man is a career con man. He goes into Vegas casinos, him and his wife with like little pet tiger cubs. They rent suites in casinos. They like find young hot singles. They find young hot singles and couples, and they convince them to go back up to their suite, pet the tiger, so that they can have a big orgy. And it's gross, and that's what they do. So this guy does a bunch of like con man stuff, and he recently was in the news because he there was like allegedly he had a stroke because like he allegedly said that he had a stroke because his drink was poisoned. Like they were having conversations with alleged fans, so-called fans, who came up to them in a casino a couple of weeks ago. Somebody they didn't recognize gave him a drink. The drink was supposedly spiked. It turned out that that's a bunch of crap. And this lovely man, C. Carter, I don't know who they are, or woman. I can't totally tell by their profile, but I think it's I'm pretty sure it's a man. Yeah, it looks
there are
like
no girls on the internet.
No, of course not. They're only on OnlyFans. Oh boy, we're gonna get in trouble for that one. Yeah, it looks like a dude. C. Cartier, who left us a very nice tip. Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate it. Apparently, this whole thing was a stunt. I will read the comment in thorough, updating us on the Jeff Lowe situation. It was a stunt. They claimed he had a stroke as an excuse to avoid going to court and being prosecuted. They have to prove it this morning in court, and if Lowe doesn't show, then there will be a bench warrant out on him. And wouldn't you know it, Jeff Lowe does not show. I've pulled up the article right here. I'll try to summarize. Okay, good. It's a short one. From KNTV.com by Joyce Lupiani. I hope that I'm not butchering that name. Thank you very much, Joyce Lupiani. I appreciate you doing this. So, here we go. Jeff Lowe, who became a household name because of his appearance in the docuseries Tiger King, was not in court again today in Las Vegas. He was not in court again. This is not the first time that he's skipped court. What a surprise. Career con man skipping town in court, you say? Lowe is accused of illegally using animals to make money in Las Vegas. Well, yeah, we knew that. Last month, Lowe's attorney told the judge that Lowe was unable to make it in court because he was in the hospital. The judge responded that he wanted proof. Today, Lowe's attorney told the judge that Lowe had a stroke and that he sent the required medical documents on Tuesday night. The attorney also requested that the next hearing be delayed for 6 months. Prosecutor pointed out that Lowe was seen in the public on March 27th, 4 days after the last hearing, and that he was doing what he usually does. The judge ordered the next status check to be held on May 11th. At the time, a new hearing date will be set for Lowe when he will be required to attend. According to a TMZ story, I hate those guys. This is not good journalism at all. You don't wait outside the airport waiting for a celebrity to ask them what their favorite pizza is. But yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, that's another thing altogether. They make money because stupid people pay them. So what can you do? If I can find somebody stupid enough to pay me money for being an idiot, then good for me. But unfortunately, I don't know how to do that, so I guess I really am an idiot. According to a TMZ story, Lowe had a stroke while at a casino in Oklahoma on March 18th. He reportedly spent 3 days in the hospital. Lowe and his wife also claimed afterwards that Lowe may have been poisoned. So they never got the story straight to begin with. And the judge being a judge and the prosecutor just walking around, apparently, they know that they know this guy's game. So this guy is he's probably going to skip town unless they threaten him to go to prison, in which they'll probably send him to prison anyway. So I don't know. If and when he goes down, good. That's all I can say, is if and when he goes down, good. If he doesn't, then the court systems are just not doing their jobs. But that's not a surprise to me. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's get on with the goddamn show. WrestleMania, the granddaddy of them all, the showcase of immortals, the show of shows, the greatest spectacle in sports entertainment, etc.
Yes.
Call it what you will, or the big wrestling show, or like 37 years.
Yeah.
I don't. And it's so crazy because this whole thing was like Vince McMahon's like last ditch effort before like wrestling died. Well, before
Hail Mary passed,
and it was oddly enough bankrolled by Ted Turner.
Yeah.
Which is just hilarious. Like basically, I think Vince was doing so Vince McMahon, he's a crazy person to begin with. He's a very interesting guy. Mm-hmm. He was not born Vince McMahon. Actually, he was born Vincent Lupton.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
Yeah. The documentary that they did on him was like really good for like the McMahon DVD. Mm-hmm. And he did an interview with Playboy in either the late 90s or the early 2000s, which, Playboy is not necessarily known for its content. Well, it's known for its content, but not its writing content. So, being Playboy, of course, but it's kind of a shame because Playboy has like some of the best writers in the world, but most people would not know that because they're not buying Playboy for the articles, which it's sad, but what are you going to do? He gave like a very candid interview where he chronicled abuse from his stepfather, and he had the quote in there that it was too bad that I think the exact quote is somewhere along the lines of it's too bad that my stepdad died before I could kill him. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know. Apparently, this guy was just abusive and just not good. And Vince was raised in North Carolina, actually. So Vince is a Southerner, and that might be a psychological thing as to why he doesn't like Southern things. Like, there's a lot of speculation that Vince hates things from the South because Vince is actually a Southerner. And he wants to run, and he wants to get away with it because his real father, Jess McMahon. It was one of the, I don't know. It was one of those things where like they knew, like he knew, the mother knew, and like they like didn't tell him because Jess McMahon knew that if he went looking for him, he was going to want to join the wrestling business, and he just didn't want him to get involved in being a promoter. Mm-hmm. Even though Vince is technically a third generation, his grandfather also did it.
Yes. His grandfather was a boxing and professional wrestling promoter.
Yeah. And there was the WWF, there was the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. But Vince McMahon, when he got into the business essentially and became the owner of WWE, or WWF at the time, he was doing like cross promotional work with WCW, and it like went south pretty quickly. So that kind of kickstarted the battle with like the whole like the real wrestling wars, not this like Wednesday stuff that people keep talking about, because the NXT AEW thing, WWE AEW, it's not a real war. There's not really any real competition for them. I don't think, just because WWE is in like a too big to fail position and AEW is still a fledgling. Like, it's still like they can't, they're having difficulty growing their audience, where WWE, the audience is falling, but WWE's in a too big to fail position. They just had the $1 billion deal with Peacock, so like they don't.
Yeah.
They're no, like, all WWE has to do is just outlast AEW, and that could last as long. That could last only a few years. We don't really know. But I'm pretty sure that, like, after Vince passes, they'll probably sell the company to like Disney or NBC or Universal.
Yeah,
so So I don't think that. So there's no real competition there, even though everybody wants it to be, or like all the big marks act like it's going to be, but it's not. Anyway, so Vince McMahon gets like this. He gets this set. I forget if he got like a settlement, or if he got. No, I don't think it was a settlement. If he got some kind of like money, or he used the money from his Ted Turner appearances or something like that, to like he did it in order to and he like used it to pay for like all of the whole pay-per-view idea of WrestleMania, and also wrestling on like a big pay-per-view nationwide had not been done before. So Vince really was putting like everything, including his own assets and all of that stuff, into it. And like, again, I'm not quite like, I forget how the story goes, and I apologize if I'm getting it wrong, but like he got money through Ted Turner in some way. And he used those funds as well as his own to put on the first WrestleMania. And if that didn't succeed, then they were pretty much going to close.
Yeah.
Because what he had done was he started bankrupting all of the territories around him too, by buying all of their top guys. So like, he started that whole like domino effect of being, the number one promotion. Where at the time it was WCW, but that only lasted up until, I think, December 1997. Yeah.
I also want to point out that technically WrestleMania wasn't the first wrestling pay-per-view, because WCW had put on Starrcade, I believe, the previous year.
Yes.
The difference was that
I think it was the national scale that was the difference. Yeah. It wasn't the first wrestling pay-per-view.
Yeah, Starrcade was more of a regional thing.
Yeah.
Also, WrestleMania, while Starrcade was kind of like the biggest names in wrestling at the time, WrestleMania was more geared towards getting a wider audience of the general public. So there was a lot of celebrities, like Muhammad Ali. I'm pretty sure Cyndi Lauper was involved with the first. They were getting a lot of mainstream celebrities. So whereas Starrcade was kind of like a exhibition of like the best talent in wrestling at the time, WrestleMania was more of a like, let's see how many people we can get to watch pro wrestling by having all these big name stars on there.
Well, that was where it started to like get into the whole like sports entertainment idea, because Vince had he had a vision that like not of what wrestling could be per se, but of what mainstream wrestling could be, because what WCW was doing and what WWE were doing were always two very different things. Up until even when we get to the eventual sports entertainment and whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
The WCW was strictly a wrestling product. The NWA was strictly a wrestling product. WWE has always tried to embody the entertainment aspect. It's always been like wrestling. I hate to say this, but like wrestling it's more prominent now, but wrestling in WWE has always kind of taken a back seat to the entertainment portion.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can have an argument on like, was that the best thing for wrestling or was it the worst thing for wrestling?
It's hard to tell.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say because, essentially it saved wrestling because wrestling was really getting hit hard in the 80s. Public scrutiny was at an all-time high because there was, the fears over steroid abuse. You had the whole thing with that we talked about on the first episode with what was it, Dr. D, who slapped a reporter. People, the public was really starting to scrutinize wrestling, and at the same time, there were losing fans. Like, there wasn't really nearly as many people watching wrestling. So you could really argue that in some ways, WrestleMania and Vince saved wrestling, but at the same time, it kind of fundamentally changed wrestling because Vince basically monopolized wrestling, by buying up all the territories, and B, they turned wrestling into a main, and this is like, the whole like hipster argument, like, when things get popular, they're not as good. When the more mainstream things get, the less good they are. So
that's not always true. That always depends on how it's on how the product is being handled. Like whether or not the product changes. That depends, because you could say, because like the MCU, perfect example of this. Mm-hmm. It's as mainstream as it could get, to the point where, I don't know, but I can't speak for everyone, but I'm starting to tire of it because I'm getting into like I think that there's just like a superhero overload thing. But like the MCU, it's it's as mainstream as it could get, yet it's all pretty well done. I can't say that there's any bad movies necessarily, but there's not any. Yeah, I would say there's varying levels, but I wouldn't say that any of them, any of the Marvel movies suck.
No, they're not terrible. But again, it's like not great filmmaking. Like, you're not watching it to like see like a great plot or great acting. You're watching it because there's big explosions and cool like mech suits and superheroes and all this other, good action sequences.
Right, but I know what I want, and they're delivering it to me.
Right. So
I have very specific expectations. This is why I'm like using this, because you could compare it directly to wrestling. Whereas with wrestling, I know what I want, and many times they do not give it to me anymore.
Yes.
So that is the problem.
And it's like, so it's the same argument, wrestling became that, like, where it's like, big guys and stuff like that, and like, just like big personalities and crazy characters, and it's fun to watch. If you want to watch like good technical wrestling, well, you watch the indies then, or something like that, or or New Japan's, something that's not as mainstream. So you kind of you still have the choice there to get, if you really want to see like the big stars that are like the top of the wrestling industry, you could watch WWE, WrestleMania, that kind of thing. If you want to see like better, good technical wrestling, then
Ring of Honor,
right?
But it depends. Like, you do have your flavors, and that's nice. Mm-hmm. But I do wish that the mainstream stuff was better, because I know that it can be. It's just seen better days, but the problem is the product is just not what it used to be, because it either too much of it doesn't make any sense, or the booking is lazy, or
that's definitely for sure. I would say the booking is definitely.
I would say that's probably the worst thing, is that it just doesn't make any sense and that it's lazy. But on top of that, you have like 20, 30 something writers and agents and all these people, and no matter what they do, like, first of all, that's too many, but second of all, no matter what they do, Vince has the final say, so they're really just writing the show that Vince wants at the end of the day, and he's only getting older and a little bit more senile or out of touch with certain things.
I think he's definitely out of touch, that's for sure.
So you have that problem, and they also have their own brand of comedy, and it's not good. It's
no. Well, I think the thing is that WWE kind of, Vince specifically, I want to say, kind of dwells too much on the past. They want to try to reclaim their former glory, and they do whatever they can to try to do that, and it always fails, like when they had the Attitude Era, which is often lauded as the best era of WWE, right? It was the the best storylines, the best wrestlers, of that generation. It was the best. And then you had the Ruthless Aggression Era, and all they tried to do throughout that whole thing was try to recapture the edginess of the Attitude Era, but it wasn't good writing, so it was
right. They just tried to turn it. They just tried to turn it up to 11 yes. on just all of like you said, the edginess and the violence.
Yeah. And it just got awkward and cringy, and then they went PG.
At points, it either became so it was either it either became it never fell into a just okay thing. The Ruthless Aggression stuff. It was either, oh, this is really great, or this is,
why is this on TV?
Yeah, it was never anything else.
Right.
There was never oh, that was just okay. There wasn't but there were too many things that became forgettable. But but I would say for every really great thing that they did, there was something equally bad.
Right. And it was weird because they would have good wrestling matches, but with really terrible storylines.
Yes.
The custody of Dominic ladder match between Eddie Guerrero and
Rey Mysterio.
Yeah,
they could if they wanted to do a ladder match.
They're great match, great technical wrestlers that work so great together
in
the ring. But the storyline is what were they thinking?
Yeah. Or the infamous Katie Vick storyline where,
oh my god,
we have two good wrestlers who are fighting over who are both the champions who are both champions. We're why can't we need to see these people to fight for to unify the belts, or to see if one guy is just going to get two belts, and for one belt or the other, or both, and for whatever reason, instead of just something coherent, we got a necrophilia angle that nobody asked for, but we got that. I just don't understand. There were a lot of but the match wasn't half bad, but the storyline terrible.
Yeah, and then you had the PG era, which they continued to try to make it the Attitude Era, except they couldn't do any of the edginess because it was PG. So it became awkward and cringy and forgettable. I think in a lot of ways. I mean the early PG era, besides some of the there was a couple highlights, obviously CM Punk, with the pipe bomb, and there's really not much. Maybe the advent of NXT, and how that kind of blew up. And
NXT was horrible in the beginning.
Yeah, but you look at how many of the
once they actually figured out what they wanted to do, once they got away from the whole reality TV element of it, then it was
the reality TV thing.
Right. Once they started to actually make it a real show about a real wrestling show about the talent who was doing what they had trained to do all their lives, then it was good.
Yeah.
But it had a very bad beginning.
Yeah.
But all this stuff just kind of stems from WrestleMania. Yeah. This whole WWE style. I mean, and that first one really, it gave them the gangbuster numbers that they needed. And they had Mr. T with Hulk Hogan, who were the two biggest stars in their own worlds at the time. Mr. T, you couldn't get enough of him. And they wait, was Rocky 3 85 or was that later?
I think Rocky 3 was 84.
Or was it earlier?
Hold on. Rocky 3.
Okay, well, the two had been in a movie together anyway.
82 Rocky 3 came out. So,
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So, I mean, you had Mr. T and Hulk Hogan in that. Obviously his Thunder Lips.
Yep, Muhammad Ali was a special referee. Like, they got everybody they needed. They even got Liberace as the timekeeper, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
And I think they made him dance with the Rockettes in there, because of course it was in Madison Square Garden. Where else are you going to do it?
Well, yeah.
But yeah, the attendance for the event. Now, I know WWE likes to inflate their numbers on the attendance, but these may have been real numbers since this was the first time. Since this was the first one, they may have actually been honest. The attendance was 19,121. I'm not sure how many people MSG fully seats when you don't have the whole like entrance, the camera aisle, and all that other stuff.
Right.
But you fit nearly 20,000 people in the room. That's pretty great.
That's, well, for the 80s, definitely.
Yeah, for 85, yeah. The event was seen by over 1 million viewers through closed circuit, so it was the biggest one on closed circuit of all time.
Which was that was basically the precursor to pay-per-view was closed circuit television. It was and also again a complete Hail Mary. If this failed, then World Wrestling Federation would have been insolvent. McMahon put all of his money that he had into this,
right?
Borrowed money to put into this.
Well,
and this would have destroyed World Wrestling Federation and possibly destroyed a good chunk of the wrestling industry.
Yeah.
And
well, I wonder if. I'm sorry. Go on.
I was going to say it might have it might have turned out differently going even into the 90s. It might have rippled into we might have had a completely different wrestling industry now if that had failed.
Yep. I wonder if WrestleMania had failed and the then WWF went bankrupt and shut down, I wonder if WCW would have just continued doing what McMahon did and just cherry picked all the big talents from the territories, or if they would have just left them alone and then the territories would have just gotten their guys back and they would have just been able to go back to the way things were.
I think at that time WCW was way more into respecting the territory system. So, maybe if someone had taken over WCW with the same intentions that Vince McMahon had of taking over the territories, then perhaps they would have turned into that. Maybe WCW would be now the preeminent wrestling company in the world.
Yeah, well, who was running WCW at the time?
I am not actually sure. It wasn't Ted Turner yet.
Ted Turner just owned the Turner Network. He didn't own anything else.
Right, and
he owned the Turner. Yeah, he owned the Turner Network and he owned WCW. But who was running it? Because Ted Turner wasn't running it. He was running all of Turner at the time. WCW was just another program on his lineup. Who was the guy who was in charge of WCW?
Let's see.
Because I'm wondering if this was Bill Watts at the time.
Jim Barnett.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, he came from a line of wrestling promoters, and I don't know if the son or the grandson is Josh Barnett.
And Jim Crockett also, I think, was involved in some capacity as well.
Well, because Jim Crockett was doing NWA, and they had the cross-promoting thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it probably would have just went back to the way that it was.
Yeah, I think so. It probably... again,
so the territories probably would have been they probably would have been able to to get themselves back on their feet, maybe. I don't think every territory, but I think the bigger ones would have been okay.
Yes, and I think that if business people saw how badly WWE failed, they would be less inclined to invest in wrestling. Mm-hmm. So I think the people that would be in control would be more wrestling promoters, not as opposed to businessmen, and would have kept the territory system because that was the system that they knew and that they thought was the best. So, honestly, we might still be in the territory system if it wasn't for the success of the first WrestleMania.
Yeah, we probably would. Or at least we would have for a long time. Like I think the territories would have stayed.
They would have lasted well into the 90s, definitely.
Yeah, because I don't think Paul Heyman would have done the same thing with I don't think he would have done what Vince did with WCW, with ECW. I think Paul Heyman would have just started ECW, and there would have been, they probably would have done a territory thing too. That probably would have just been the Philadelphia territory, which was just like the Extreme one. Unless,
he might have been able to expand to what was left of the New England territory after WWF was gone.
Yeah, that's possible. He could have been the big New York territory.
Yeah.
You don't know. But it would be interesting to go into that reality and just see what that is.
Yeah.
But anyway, long story short, WrestleMania was a big success, and it took wrestling to the heights that it was to unprecedented heights.
Mm-hmm.
As well as that company, it ended up becoming the biggest company. But Vince took the biggest gamble, and it paid off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you gotta spend money to make money.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah, you sure do. And now, it's like we said, 37 years later, God knows how many matches have been done in that one time. I remember... What was the first WrestleMania that you watched?
I think the first WrestleMania... So I don't know the exact first one that I watched. I know the first one that I remember watching was WrestleMania 20, where I sat and I watched the whole thing from start to end. That was probably my first real WrestleMania experience. I probably had caught matches here and there before that, but that was my first I'm sitting down to watch WrestleMania, and this is I'm purposely watching it, the whole thing from start to end.
I still have the DVD of that.
It actually is my favorite WrestleMania match of all time. Also takes place during WrestleMania 20, and that is Benoit, Triple H, Shawn Michaels for the World Heavyweight Championship.
That's your favorite?
It's absolutely my favorite match of all time. Well, my favorite WrestleMania match of all time.
Yeah, I have to rewatch that one. It is really good, and none of us were expecting Chris Benoit to win. It's just, it sucks what happened.
Yes.
Eventually with him and the situation with his family, and
yes,
just putting a black on his career and just and the business itself. But we won't get into that on this one. I want to keep. Let's do a happy podcast.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll have time for that at some point, but not today.
Those three guys were the top of the wrestling industry at that time. I think that was 2004. Yeah, 2004. They were the top of the wrestling industry, and they just put on an absolute clinic.
Yeah, they did. And I think and Triple H and Shawn Michaels both were bleeding heavily.
Oh yeah. Triple H was really bad. And then you had Guerrero versus Kurt Angle for the WWE Championship, another great match, and probably one of the best WrestleMania moments all time. Chris Benoit wins the championship. The crowd's going crazy, freaking streamers and ticker tape flying everywhere, and Guerrero comes out, and they share that moment, both two men in the ring.
I'm getting chills now. There's nothing that's the best possible moment that they ever had, and it was so organic, and they're both crying and hugging each other because they both did it. They were both the underdogs, and they did it on the biggest stage of them all in Madison Square Garden, and nobody will ever take that away from them. And and now they can't show it because of Chris Benoit, but but that was awesome. My friend Joe Marone, who I believe I will be seeing Sunday for the pay-per-view, he went. Him and his dad are big wrestling fans. His dad saw Bruno Sammartino in the Garden when he was a kid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Rich. he's told the story so many times that like he it was like the 70s, and they saw Bruno Sammartino, and he saw Bruno Sammartino lose the belt to the Iron. I don't know if he saw this one, but he has seen Bruno Sammartino in the Garden, and like multiple times throughout his life when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. But the one when he lost to when he lost the belt to, I believe, Nikolai Volkov, I want to say. Mm-hmm. And everybody was crying. He said, like, in the streets, grown men were crying because everybody bought into it, and he was their hero. He was the Italian-American hero in New York in the 70s.
Yeah, and that was the time where kayfabe, nobody knew that wrestling was fake at that time. It was as real as, what you saw was what was happening. There was no... it wasn't set up backstage. They weren't doing just like stunts. They didn't practice, before. That was a real match, and you just saw your hero lose the belt,
Yeah. Yeah, it is Ivan Kolov.
Okay, yeah.
50 years ago, January 18th, 1971.
Wow.
Ivan Kolov delivered a Russian leg drop to the Worldwide Wrestling Federation heavyweight champion Bruno Sammartino in Madison Square Garden to get the 1-2-3, becoming only the third man to hold the WWF World Championship. But this is when the average title reign lasted for several years, like at least 5 years.
Yeah.
So, like, Bruno Sammartino, I think he held the belt for 8 years, was his record. Which, that will never happen again. We don't, just people don't have the attention span. Like, now, holding the belts for 6 months means something.
Yeah.
It's just crazy to see how far the times have gone, where, like, an average title reign is, like, 3 months now. Where back then, your average was about 5 years. And, like...
It would be nice to go back to that. Or at least... Maybe not like 5 years, but like it'd be nice to see
2.
Hold the belt for a year or 2. Yeah.
Yeah. A year or 2 would be nice. I think Ivan Koloff ended up losing the belt after 3 years or 4 years because he got like so many death threats, and they were like, we can't like do this. Like this was when but this was crazy. If you went to certain countries, like people would, or certain cities at that, like people would bring weapons to try to attack the bad guy if they could, to try to attack the heel. Like, especially in the South American places, like Puerto Rico or Mexico, they would, like, people would get stabbed. Like, wrestlers would get stabbed by the fans. And people would throw glass bottles in the ring. I mean, they would throw garbage. This is all over this part, but like in certain states, like southern states or like Midwestern states and like the South American countries, they would bring like legitimate weapons to like try to like get their revenge for their heroes. It's just nuts.
Yeah, well, again, that was like, kayfabe was real. People thought it was real. There was very few people in that time that were privy to the fact that wrestling was, I don't like to say fake, because, it is...
No, it's a physical, it's a
stunt show. People do get really hurt.
Yeah.
I guess, not fake, but set up. Or predetermined, maybe is the best way to say it,
Yeah, I would say that. It gives the business dignity.
Yeah. Nobody knew. There was very few people that were privy to that information, and so, and they kept kayfabe in and outside the ring. I mean, we've talked about this before. Like, you did not, if you were a face, were not seen with a heel outside of, like, in a bar anywhere, even if that guy was your best friend.
They didn't even have the same locker rooms.
No. And if you were spotted, and you were punished harshly by management if you broke kayfabe. It was not a joke. So people thought it was real, and they would attack especially heels. They hated heels. Having heels
that means they were doing their job.
It means something completely different than it did back then. Heel heat now is like people are pissed off at you on Twitter, but like they know you're putting on an act. Back then you would, like you said, get death threats.
I believe Jim Cornette has framed certain death threats.
Yeah.
I've heard him talk on his podcast a couple of times. He's had certain death threats framed.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
No, I would too. It's a badge of honor. It means you were doing your job.
Now, and I'm sure there's marks today that still think it's, that the heels are actually assholes in real life, I think, MJF does a really good job of
he does.
On and off screen. Like, he's a heel all the time. He's a heel on Twitter. He's a heel when he meets fans, like, on the street. So he does a great job. And there's not too many people that are... I think because now wrestling is so intertwined with, like, charity events, they do Make-A-Wish all the time. It's really hard for wrestlers to stay heels outside of the ring.
I mean, the business just...
They're working with kids.
Yeah, well, the business got too corporate. Like, that's kind of what happened, is that it just became too corporate, too overproduced, too much of, just... It entered a territory where it was not supposed to ever be, and... It just kind of went the way that all big business does. So there's a handful of reasons you can point to as to why WWE is not what it used to be, and the main reason was becoming a publicly traded company. That's essentially what led to the beginning of what this is.
Well,
I mean, they've been a publicly traded company since like 2002, I think. So they still got away with like a bunch of stuff, but like now that, we're in a more focused world where people are paying more attention to that stuff, now it's, now they have to do certain things, and it's a bunch of hooey, because the wrestling business should not have, like, it's doing things that type of business should never have to do. Mm-hmm. Or at least not with its performers. But, that's just the nature of big business. What are you going to do? America. So what I was saying was my buddy Joe Marone, and his dad, lifelong wrestling fan, saw Bruno Sammartino. People cried. He probably cried.
Yeah.
He went to WrestleMania 20, and he still has the chair, actually.
That's amazing.
Because, like, they would get in... Because, like, when you sit in the front row for these wrestling pay-per-views, they have a special chair, like, commemorating the event with, like, the graphics and everything. So he kept the folding chair. And he has a few. So if we ever do a wrestling pay-per-view at his house, we tend to see or sit on the chairs. Certain chairs. Some chairs he won't take out anymore. That's one of them. I think that chair, he'll only do it on WrestleMania if he's sitting in it, which, appropriate.
Yeah.
I don't have a chair. I've never sat that close.
I've never either. When I went to SummerSlam, I was pretty close, but we weren't we were still in, like, the stadium seating. We weren't on the floor with the chairs, but I was, like, pretty much level with the ring where our seats were. So I had a great view.
Oh, that's cool.
But I didn't get a chair, which it's fine. It was still a great night. It was a really good SummerSlam. I think it was SummerSlam 2007, because I had just gotten my driver's license.
Okay.
So it was a good show. It was fun.
I don't think I was watching at that point. I think I had stopped watching I think the first time that I stopped watching was about 2006, maybe.
I think 2008, 2007, 2008 is when I really stopped watching.
Yeah, around then. I think I had started it again. I think I was still watching casually. Like, I was still watching, like, the big pay-per-views if my friends were, like, hosting and we just, like, went to go hang out. Like, that I did for years. Yeah. But I wasn't watching, like, religiously after, like, 2006. Maybe, like, somewhere around, like, shortly after Eddie Guerrero passed, I I stopped watching. So I would say like 2000 and I would say he died in 2005. So I would say I stuck around until probably around 2006, and then I just started trailing off.
I think I stopped really watching religiously around the time that Chris Benoit passed, and then I think WrestleMania 24, which was in 2008, might have been the last WrestleMania that I watched. I bought and I watched.
Yeah, well, we watched those for sure. I mean, I watched just about every WrestleMania since I was like 15, 16.
Yeah.
Maybe actually no, probably younger than that. Probably like 13 or 12. Yeah, now I'm trying to pinpoint the exact time. But anyway, I had watched. I had stopped watching religiously around then. So there was just a lot of things that just happened in between that I didn't know. Like even the PG transition. One day I was like, "Why is it PG?" I think it had been PG for like a year or two at that point, and I had not noticed because I was only watching very casually. And I think one day I saw it and I was like, "What the hell is this crap? Why is this PG?" Like, but. Yeah, he went to the show. He got the chair. I think the first WrestleMania that I watched was, I think it was WrestleMania 15. It was either 15 or 16. 17 was the first one that I watched with all of my friends.
Yeah.
But 15 was the first one that I watched. That was when Stone Cold fought The Rock for the first time at WrestleMania.
Yeah.
And that was my favorite match for the longest time. That's still one of my favorite matches. But 19 is the best one. Between Stone Cold and The Rock, that's the second time when we end up having the heel turn with Stone Cold, which even he has gone back and said he was just trying to make it work as a bad guy. And if he went back in time, he would have just given Vince the stunner and like just done the heel turn the next night, or just not done the heel turn at all.
He was too much of a fan favorite to be heel.
Yeah, I mean, you have to give him credit for trying to reinvent himself because he felt in his mind that the character was getting stale, and I appreciate that. But it was just one of those things that the fans, they just, even if they wanted to see it, just to see what it would look like as a heel Stone Cold, they just didn't have it in their hearts to boo him. They just loved him too much.
Well, the problem is he was already an anti-hero, so he was already kind of doing heel-ish things, but like he was fighting the man, so it was good, you know. So it was like kind of awkward for him to be like a heel because it's like he's already an anti-hero. Like, so what, is he going to turn into like a bad guy now? Like,
right, like he was going like as an anti-hero, he was fighting the bad guys and the good guys at the same time.
Right. And it's like if he wants like him being a heel is him like literally bowing to like the corporation and like being Vince's like personal bitch, which is like. That does not. No one wants to see that. That's stupid. That's like just killing his character. It's making his character lame.
Right. I was gonna say it's out of character completely.
Yeah. So.
I mean, he said it too that he wishes that he didn't do that, but he tried, and it's not his fault. It just wasn't gonna work, and it was just one of those things that maybe it sounded good on paper, or maybe he had it in his head that it would go really well, but just. In execution, you can't plan for how the crowd is going to react.
Yeah. Yeah, you know.
But yeah,
especially like again because the crowd just didn't want to see it. Like it's just it didn't work. So it was a good try, but.
Just close, but no cigar.
Yeah.
And then they had the invasion angle for that, which that was a disaster in itself. Which had they just not been doing short term thinking and they had actually just waited a whole year, it would have been great. But that's another story for another day.
Yeah.
But but that was the first one that I remember. That was the first one that I remember watching fully. I remember my favorite, the first one that I had watched endlessly, that I watched multiple times, was WrestleMania 12. I had just, like, my local public library had I believe we spoke about this before, but my local public library, they had, like, at some point in time, they started getting a VHS archive, and it was all WrestleManias, which I thought was weird, but I'm not going to tell the library to, like, change their selection. So I started renting all of their WrestleManias as soon as I could. I think I would rent the maximum amount of wrestling tapes to hold for the week, because I knew that I was going to watch them within that time. I think one time I had like 4 or 5 rentals, and I didn't even know that the library would let anybody take out that much stuff.
Yeah.
But we lived down the street, so it didn't matter. And I think but like WrestleMania 12, I was staying at my aunt's house, and we rented it from her Blockbuster. And I like the Iron Man match between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. Just that was another one of the best matches that I had ever seen, and I still think that holds up. That match is just incredible from bell to bell, and you really like. I loved how it was the Iron Man match, and the whole match went to a sudden death. I loved that finish. I loved that idea, and you have Shawn Michaels coming down from the rafters. That and then Bret Hart like doing, just being the consummate professional that he is. Doing a hell of a match and working a really great match. He was hurt during that time too.
Yeah.
I think he tweaked his knee or something like that, and he needed to get another surgery, so he like took time off after that match. But according to his book, him and Shawn Michaels were supposed to have a moment together after the match. Like, he was supposed to get up and, like, they were supposed to hug and do, like, a high and, like, do, like, a celebratory thing so that Bret could pass the torch to Shawn. And apparently Shawn Michaels went the other way and, like, and he was, like, being an asshole the whole time because, well, this doesn't surprise me, because Shawn Michaels in the 90s, he was not the best guy to get along with. He had a big drug and alcohol problem and everything, and he was just, it's amazing that guy was able to even work. Like, there's been a recent interview where Shawn Michaels was asked about, where, like, Shawn Michaels was either asked or he talked about the behavior, about what he would have done, like, now that he works with NXT as a trainer. He, like, someone asked him, what would you tell your younger self? And he's like, honestly, I probably would have fired me.
Yeah.
I would have definitely given myself penalties, and I probably, with my behavior, I would have sent me to rehab, and if that didn't work, I would have fired me. But somehow that didn't happen, and here I am.
Well, I think it was a different time in wrestling, definitely, because everybody was doing something. They were all doing pills, for one.
Or they were drinking.
Some of them, or they were, drinking was...
Drinking, it was drinking and pills, usually.
Yeah.
And I remember in Bret Hart's, another thing in Bret Hart's book where, like he talks about how, like, everybody on the road had their vices, and, like, you kind of had to choose which vice you were going to have, because if you didn't do one of them, he felt like he would have wound up doing one of the other ones, and then one of the other ones would have killed him. So it was either it was either like women, or just like sex and cheating on your wife and whatever, and just infidelity, or drugs or alcohol, and
or some combination of the three.
Yeah, or a combination of the three. And he figured, well, I'm gonna have to pick. Like he felt like he had no choice in the matter, and he just had to pick one of them. Mm-hmm. So he was like, all right, well then I guess I'll just sleep with a bunch of women. It's gonna be the most likely one to keep me out of trouble in the other areas, and like that's not gonna kill my body. Like I'm not gonna get hurt.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can get hurt, but it's not. But like you're not gonna have like a heart attack and die because like you're not gonna OD on women, essentially.
Yeah, it's sad because I think a big reason why it's taken so much more seriously now is because of the death of Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah. And Chris Benoit. That's why we have concussion research in sports.
Benoit, especially for the concussion thing, because of the CTE, link to his crimes. But like in regards to the drug use, it was definitely Eddie Guerrero's death because he was known to have, he was known as a history of abusing both steroids and cocaine, and which a lot of guys did. And, it affected his heart, which, again, happens to a lot of guys. How many wrestlers have we lost from heart disease in the last 10 or 20 years? A lot.
Too many.
Too many. Right.
The average wrestler lives to, like, 60. Like, 60 is considered, like, an old man if you're if you were a pro wrestler in life.
Yeah.
Because they just don't see that age very often.
No. And, it's sad that it took, the death of Eddie Guerrero in the prime of his career to, like, kind of drive it into a better place, with the wellness policy. Now, the wellness policy, I think, is kind of strict and stupid in other regards, like, how they're, like, guys that smoke weed, get wellness policy violations when it's like, really? Come on. Like, weed's not going to do it. Like,
and it just got legalized in New York, for God's sakes.
Yeah. And, I get they kind of have to be, like, across the board serious, but then at the same time, it's okay for guys to do painkillers and drink. So, like, if you're going to do something, let them smoke weed because it's not addictive. It's going to help them with the pain that they inevitably have because it's a hard career, and that they're not killing their bodies with it,
Right. Plus, most of their vices now are playing video games.
Yeah.
So that's changed a whole lot.
Yeah. I think it was the Undertaker had said something about that when he was on Joe Rogan. Like, he's like, you walk into the locker room now and like half the guys are like sitting there playing Nintendo Switch, and he's like, wow, it's like way different than when I was coming up. Like, you walk into the locker room back then, guys were like, like look at his score, friggin' drugs or doing steroids.
Yeah, they had switchblades or guns in their pocket just in case the promoter was going to rip them off. It was
it's definitely a different world nowadays.
Yeah,
and, I think it's better. You look at times where
they're taking care of themselves, and they're a lot smarter with their money. Yeah. Where like back then the mentality, like they didn't have financial advisors. They didn't have like an accountant or a tax guy or whatever. They didn't have any of that stuff. And if they did, they kept it to themselves because it was such a cutthroat business. I mean, it still is, but like it was even more so back then where like you were hoping that you were hoping that you stayed on top for as long as you could, and you did whatever you could to bury the other guy, which that still happens, but now they're smarter with their money, and like the mentality back then was, well, I better spend all of my money because you had this big Jones mentality where like people needed to keep up with the Joneses, and if you had money, you had to show everybody that you had money for some stupid reason. Where like now you see all these like tech billionaires and they're just wearing like, a $30 jeans, a $15 t-shirt, and that's their whole wardrobe every day. And like you'd never know if you saw them on the street.
Right. Yeah, it's a different mentality than it was back, especially in the 80s. 80s was all about, like, showing off your wealth.
Yeah.
And I kind of think it's better also in regards to, like the workers themselves. Like, when you had guys in the 80s and 90s coming out to the ring either stoned or drunk or something, the word hurt. And now it's like people don't tolerate it anymore. It's like when a few years ago in TNA, when it was Sting versus Jeff Hardy.
Oh, and Jeff Hardy was wasted, yeah.
Yeah, completely wasted. And, like, people were mad about it, It's
yeah.
like, if you're gonna, like, people came, they paid good money to see a match. Like, they don't want to see you come out stoned and, like, unable to perform. You know?
Well, first of all, Impact was very irresponsible for even sending him out.
Well,
and then Sting looked at him and was like, "There's no way he can do this," so he just rolled him up really quickly, and like that was the match because he was like, "Well, we're not going through this match. Something bad is going to happen if we do 20 minutes or 30 minutes."
I think Sting also had the.
He was mad too.
He was pissed, and he had the ref do the X.
Yeah.
To like the ramp, so that way they knew something was wrong. And then of course Bischoff came out, saw what kind of condition Jeff Hardy was in. It was like, all right, just pin him, and get it. And Jeff didn't even know what was happening. He thought the match was still going on and tried to actually kick out of the. Sting power pinned him pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, but the officials should have never let him out. They should have just they should have just done something on the fly and just said, "Well, he can't do it. Let's just write him off right now."
Yeah, he got attacked backstage, something like that.
Let's just do something. We'll deal with it later. And let's just send out, I don't know, Christopher Daniels or somebody who can give these people a good match.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show that TNA is just not good writing at all, because they could have saved that match, and instead they just chose to end it as it was. And Sting was pissed off, the fans were pissed off, everybody was just pissed off.
Yeah, so. And how many members of their audience did they lose that day? For good. How many people just never came back after that?
Yeah. Especially because it was that was their main pay-per-view, I'm pretty sure. And
I think it was what was it, Bound for Glory? Is that their big one?
Or some kind of Road to Glory or something like that, maybe. It was it was basically their WrestleMania. It was their WrestleMania analog, and it was the main event of their WrestleMania analog with two of the most famous wrestlers of all time, and people were looking forward to it.
Yeah. Just not cool. But
no.
While the policy has slowly gotten better over time, there's still a lot to be desired, and they have a strike. They have a way that you can remove a strike now too.
Yeah.
But that was supposedly done for. I mean, this is all. I don't work there, so how the hell do I know? It's just on things that I've read, which is not always accurate when it comes to wrestling journalism.
Yeah.
I would say wrestling journalism takes the L more than it takes a W. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I would say, supposedly there's a rule there now where if you're good for a certain amount of time, you can remove a strike, which I think is fair. Mm-hmm. But supposedly that rule was put in place because Randy Orton had violated a third strike again. He's violated the policy multiple times.
Well, he's always been caught smoking weed. That's why, because he's a known stoner. That's
Well, I think I think when he was younger there were other substances first
possibly.
But I think more frequently it's just been weed. But he But he got caught with something, and it would have been the third time that this happened, and the third strike would have been you're fired, and they didn't want to do it to him for whatever reason. He's a golden boy in that company, so
they've been building him up as the face of the company for years, since he was just got into the company.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I don't know. I've never really seen what the big deal was about him. I don't know.
I mean, he's okay. I don't think he's a terrible wrestler.
No, I don't think he's not a bad wrestler, but I don't think he's like this amazing gift from God like they like talk about. Like every time I see somebody rave about him, and I'm like, he's pretty good, but I don't know. He just, for whatever reason, he just doesn't do anything for me.
I mean, he's a main eventer, definitely.
Yes.
It's debatable if he should be the face of the company, which he has been for a while. You know,
yeah.
I would say there are others that are probably more deserving of being the face of the company, but you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think the thing with him is like, you can tell when he just doesn't give a shit. Because when he wants to put on a good show, he will put on a really good match.
Yes.
But if he just wants to like phone it in, he'll just phone it in, and you can tell.
Well, the thing is he came up under the wing of Triple H when Triple H was the biggest asshole in wrestling.
Yeah.
And did the same shit. You know.
Triple H I don't think Triple H phoned it in, but like Triple H would bury people backstage.
Exactly, he buried people.
Like he did like he was a master politician backstage.
Absolutely.
But Randy Orton would bury you on the show, where Triple H would like just talk shit about you in the back.
Right.
But I don't know why he felt that he needed to do that, because he married into that anyway. He wasn't going anywhere. But
I think that was just him, because when he came up, that was the way things were.
Yeah.
You know, it's very old school. You know, you were either aggressive in the way you conducted yourself on in the ring and out of the ring, or you didn't get anywhere.
Yeah.
That was just how it was.
Yeah, it's true.
And you had to earn respect, you know, and so you either did that by being like the best, like a really good class act, you know, or someone that like really respects other people. Like The Undertaker, you know, is pretty much the most universally respected guy in the business, because he was always a class act, and he always like showed respect to other people, and you know, expected people to respect him, which again was, you know, that you should. It's The Undertaker. Or you know, you earned respect by being a politicker, you know, and you know, kind of.
Yeah, which Hulk Hogan is notorious for.
Exactly, and you kind of show, like, I think Triple H, yeah, he did bury people, but he also took punishment when it was deserved, like the Madison Square Garden incident, when you know. He was the one. The punishment fell solely on his shoulders, and he took it. He didn't complain about it. He was like, "All right, I'll do it. That's fine." You know.
Yeah.
You know, and he jobbed for 6 months after that.
Yeah. Well, WrestleMania 12, he lost to the Ultimate Warrior in 6 seconds.
Yes, and his finisher was no sold, like completely.
Completely.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that, you know. If you could politic, but if you're willing to take your punishment when you deserve it, then again, that's how you earn respect. So,
yeah, I mean, I don't have anything bad to say about Triple H. At times he's been my favorite wrestler.
Yeah, he's up there, and he's probably top 5 for me.
Yeah,
Triple H.
Yeah, I would say so. What are some of your top 5 favorite WrestleMania matches?
Well, okay, I already said the triple threat with Shawn Michaels, Triple H.
Triple H with Booker T is not one of mine, by the way. I hate that match because Booker T should have won. This is somebody who... That match was just... The storyline was inappropriate. That was one of those cringy things from the Ruthless Aggression era, and it was only made more cringy when Triple H won. After the 30 seconds of nothing, when they're both dead on the floor, somehow Booker T doesn't kick out. That wasn't cool. They should have had Booker T get up, kick out, and beat him.
Yeah.
But for some stupid reason, they didn't do that. Even if Triple H was going to win the title the next night again and give Booker T the one-day reign, they still should have just let him win at WrestleMania, just to put that on there, so the people would always just watch that match. Because I think people would have gone back to watching it and people would have loved that match because it was a good match. but except for the stupid finish.
I think also the way they tried to like play it off, like it wasn't a racist thing. It was he WCW guys, not
no. You showed his mugshot in the promo. Like it's pretty obvious. Anyway, we'll get away from that one. But I felt the need to say that to bring that up since we were on the subject of Triple H and best matches because that's not a good one. That's a worst match for sure. I would say that might be the worst WrestleMania match, if not the Triple H Ultimate Warrior 1-2. There have been, like the gimmick battle royal was not. That was not gonna be a 5-star match, but it was entertaining.